Dans une minute. Alors, bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue à cette
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this regular public meeting this October 27th, the meeting of the City of Dieppe. And I'm very pleased to see a great number of people around here. I think everybody's waiting eagerly to see how much money they're going to have to play with next year. That's going to be the big discussion this evening. Now, so to open the meeting, the City of Dieppe recognizes that the land on which it operates is part of the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And dear colleagues, let's have the serenity.
Merci bien.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's continue on. So after this opening word, then the deputy mayor will have the floor as soon as I get his mic open. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Last week at the annual meeting of the AFMNB, we received the Jean-Jacques Roy Award. It's a prize of excellence in municipal affairs. And this prize was awarded because of our tree code, our tree bylaw. It's very innovative. We're the first city in Atlantic Canada to have adopted such a bylaw. So I am now going to hand it over to His Worship.
Merci. Je pense qu'on a fait assez d'annonces.
I think that's enough announcements for this evening. Well, let's call the meeting to order. The confirmation of quorum. Do we have quorum this evening? Yes, we're over the quorum. Any conflicts of interest? Does anybody have a conflict of interest? This is the time to mention it. No? Okay. And the adoption of the agenda. It's been moved by Councillor Lantaigne and seconded by Councillor Turgeon-Roy on the question. If there are none, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. And contrary, nay. It's carried. And the agenda is adopted, which brings us to presentations, inquiries, and petitions. We don't have anything this evening. Oh, yes, we do. We have the big question of the day. Everybody is waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen next year. And the director of money? No, our director of finance, our chief of financial officer, Mr. Thériault, is here. Good evening. Good evening, Your Worship, and congratulations for the award. Councillors, colleagues, members of the public. So this is the moment. This evening is when it's going to happen. We're going to present the general operating budget this evening, followed by the water and sewage operating budget. On these first two slides, I'm going to summarize what revenues and expenses have changed year over year. We'll see all of these figures again during the presentation. So first of all, you can see that new revenues are about $4.3 million for 2026. The 3.9 million, the largest part of that, comes from the increase in the tax base, an increase of 4.9%. If you've been following the news, if you know what the province of New Brunswick is set as an increase in Dieppe, that was 5.5, but that was the tax assessment. There's a difference between the tax base and the tax assessment. So here it's the tax base that has gone up by 4.9%. There's been a small decrease in the non-tax revenues of $400,000, and I'll come back to that a little later. An increase in previous year's surplus, which means that in 2023, we had a surplus of $350,000, and in 2024 is 1.8 million, 1 million, so $800,000 more. The funding grants were stable, so that gives us 4.3 million in new revenues. What did we do with this new revenue? The first line, or the first two lines here, mention the RCMP this year, and this is new. I didn't used to do this, but I've divided it into two categories. When we get the bill from the RCMP, we get we have their budget, and below that we have the surplus or the deficit from previous years. If it's a surplus, that's great. If it's a deficit, that doesn't really help us, as you can imagine. So when they come to present, quite often they talk about the upper line before the surplus. So last year, for example, their budget went up by 12%, and that 12% doesn't include the new request for HR. So that wasn't included in the budget, that amount. So the 12% increase for us represents $1.5 million. But in fact, it's a difference of 14% because the weighting, in other words, the amount that the city of Dieppe has to pay compared to the two other municipalities has gone up a little bit. It's a formula that they use. They look at the population numbers, and seeing as it was for 2021, that hasn't changed. But the number, they also look at the number of calls and the tax base of the three municipalities. Dieppe grew faster than the other two municipalities, so its weighting has increased. So we're now at 18.84% of the total bill. We used to be 18.5% approximately. Salaries have gone up by $900,000. There's a part of the new salaries and a part in new salaries, and a part is due to inflation. There's a new public transit system for $200,000, $1.7 million for the operating capital and replacement program. We're putting more and more money aside, cash, if you like, for capital projects. And there's 600,000 that was a decrease for debt repayment. And I was looking at that this afternoon. I was wondering which debt had disappeared, or which part of which debt, because that's what, because what happened here, did we get rid of, we paid off a whole debt? Well, no, it wasn't really at City Hall, but it was around the City Hall in place 1604. It was a loan since of 20 years since 2026. For the City Hall, it was a 25-year loan, so we still have another 5 years to go on the City Hall loan. Now, speaking of bad debt, I had to make a decision this year. We were in an environment where we didn't know first of all, there was a freeze of the tax assessments, the property tax assessments. Now we didn't know how much less revenue we'd be receiving, and invoices and bills keep going up, like the RCMP, where we're going to have to pay those bills that are increasing. So in terms of debt, there are a $6 million amount that I should have come to see you about in September or October to make a loan, and then we would have started paying it back in 2026. But because we have a lot of liquidity and because we were in these unsure times in terms of the budget, I decided I would put off this loan until next year. So it gave us a space. It's about $600,000. If we had borrowed the money at that time, there wouldn't have been a decrease of the debt repayment. It would have remained at the same because of the $6 million that we would have paid back over 15 years at $600,000 per year. But because we didn't borrow that money, it's still there. I will make that payment next year, as well as the other loans that are going to be added on this year. So we'll have a double one for next year, if you like. But let's hope that next year the situation will be different than today's. Now, other expenses, $300,000. And then we have a transfer to the reserve of 1.1 million. Earlier, I talked about some surpluses that went up. Well, the surplus, we take it and we put it in the reserve, and that's why the transfer to the reserve goes up at the same rate as the surplus. Now, the residential tax rates, you can see that it remains the same as last year, $1.36.50. For the former LSDs in Greater Lakeburn and Squidug, we're continuing to increase 5 cents per year. The rate that these LSDs should be paying is around 73 cents, and I'll explain it on the next slide. But as you can see at the bottom of the page in fine print here, this is it would take about 6 to 8 years to catch up. We're getting there. Lakeburn is at 69 cents, so we're over 73 cents by adding 5 cents. So next year should be the last of this type of increases for Greater Lakeburn. And for Squidug, they're at 62, so there's another 2 or 3 years for them. And I talked about the 73 cents. What do we mean by that 73 cents? Well, it's the residential rate is divided into two parts. One part is the shared services rate, and that all residents of Dieppe have to pay into, whether they live in the LSD or within the former city boundary, and the local services rate, that only the people who are within the Dieppe limits pay and not the LSDs. So what you see on the right is what the former LSDs do not pay. On the left, you can see that everybody has to pay for these shared government services except for the transportation. They pay for recreational and cultural services, the arenas, the pool, and so on, the parks, or emergency services, fire, police, other like planning, development, and waste management. But they also are allowed a part of the revenues, the revenues from the local revenues. So that reduces the amount on the left to come down to a rate of 73.5 cents. So everybody in Dieppe pays that amount. On the right-hand side, this is what the former LSDs do not pay for. In other words, they don't pay for road-related services, any transportation, because the government charges them 41 cents directly for these services. The water costs, the water transfers, for example, for that, it's about $2 million in the budget, but because they don't have water and sewers, they don't pay for that. The same thing for the debt and operating capital. It's a 25% of our budget that they don't pay for. And others, and minus the local revenues, as I mentioned earlier, the transfers to the reserve, which gives a 63 cents for the local services rate. But as I mentioned earlier, they don't pay the former LSD don't pay this 63 cents, but they pay 41 cents to the province for transportation mostly. So what happens then for a home in Dieppe? And I've been presenting this same table for the last few years. You can see that in 2025, for example, a home might be assessed at $525,000 as its real value. In 2026, what the province did, and this is the part that's here on the bottom, that we can imagine that the taxable value will remain the same, $439,000, but the real value has gone up. We haven't received the figures yet, but on average, from what I've heard from the province, it's probably gone up about 5% in Dieppe, which means that this house, instead of $525,000, is now worth $550,000, but the taxable amount remains the same. So that makes the difference between the real value and the taxable value, the difference even greater, and the increased protection program kicks in or stays in. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next year. We assume that it's going to be, we imagine that the freeze on the assessments was only going to be for 2026, but we have to wait to see what's going to happen in terms of the tax assessments. So this house that was taxed at a value of $439,000 with the same tax rate means that there will be no change in the property tax bill for most of the residents in Dieppe. Now, it's somewhat similar for the non-residential rates. The commercial rate is calculated by the residential rate times 1.65, and the residential rate has remained the same, and the 1.65 has not changed either. So the non-residential rate will remain the same next year as well. Now, in terms of the revenue sources, I talked about a $4.3 million increase earlier, which gives us a total budget of $89.6 million. Now, if you want to go to the details on this, so I'm going to use a word here that by the greater Dieppe, this is just for my slide here. It means, in other words, greater Dieppe, by that I means the former limits, city limits of Dieppe and the 2 LSDs that were added. That's what I mean by greater Dieppe. If you look at the tax base for the city of Dieppe, including the within the former limits of the city, the tax base went up by 4.9%. So it's at $3.72 million. The tax rate is stable, so there's no change there. And the tax base for Greater Lakeburn and Squiduk went up by $70,000, which is 6.2% for them. And so with the increase of 5 cents, that's a $90,000 extra that comes in to play, and to give a total of $81.14 million. So an increase of $4.9 million, not 3.9. It's a 4.9 here. Or 3.9 million, but 4.9%. Now, other revenue, there's a total here of 8.5 million. Here, the first line, we already mentioned it, the surplus of 2024 compared to 2023, that's 1.13 million. Transfer to the reserve goes up. So the way I calculate this transfer is to pay the one-time expenses. I've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years, so a little later in the presentation, you'll see that these one-time expenses are $2.1 million. The revenue from the ice rinks are at $1.77 million, an increase of $120,000. Revenue from the Aquatic Center, a slight decrease of $30,000 at $630,000. I think they're scheduled to close the pool at some point next year, so that might have an effect on this. Construction permits, instruction, a decrease of $900,000 for a total of $220,000. And if we're very cautious here, if the market is slowing down somewhat. We had 1 million of building permit construction revenues in the back that we've reduced it to 800,000. So that's why there's a reduction of $200,000 here. It's just to be cautious here. But this year we're still above 1.4, 1.5 million. I think we're already there for building permits. It was a very good year. Now, the funding grants remained the same at 500,000 and other revenues 1.44 million. Now, the expenses. You can see that the 2025 budget went from $8.5 million to $8.9 million, or that's the 4.3%, but 4.3, yes. But to go a little deeper in the details, I removed the one-time expenses. So what did we pay for last year that won't come back next year? So here you have the reserve, $400,000, and last year's one-time expenses of 2.3 million for a base budget of 82.6 million. And this there's a difference here of $7 million between the base budget and the budget. And this 7 million includes the transfer to the reserve 2026 of $1.5 million, the new one-time expenses of $2.1 million in 2026, new items in two. These are new expenses, $700,000 in 2026, and these are repeated. These are not one-time expenses. They're going to be repeated year after year. And we're going to continue to putting money into the asset management program, and this year it'll be $1.1 million. So the existing expenses went up by 1.6 million for a total. These and the next 4 slides we're going to look at these in more detail, but that gives a total of 89.6 million. Now the transfers to the reserve. Now before it was $400,000 in 2025. That was the surplus from 2023 that was transferred to the reserve, as the financial plan tells us to. Now, for 2026, we're talking about $1.5 million. And the same thing here. We're taking the surplus from 2024 of $1.1 million and we transfer it to the reserve. But there's a little story behind this one, this $1.1 million. In other words, last year, one of our fire trucks, well, we had to give it up and we had to find another one. It was really an emergency purchase. It hadn't been planned. I mean, it had been planned for a few years later, but not last year. So we had this $1.1 million surplus in 2024. We said, let's use that to pay for this truck that we have to purchase. The truck arrived in 2025. It was paid through the reserve. So now what do we do? Well, we're going to float the reserve again with this $1 million, 1.1 million in 2026. And the last line here is something new this year, and I mentioned it very quickly earlier. This is on the RCMP. The total bill from the RCMP, if I'm talking just about Dieppe, it's $12 million, but they had a surplus of $2 million last year, and our part is about $400,000, our part of that 2 million. So our bill went down by $400,000. We went from 12 million to 11.6. Now, what I budgeted in the books was 11.6 million, but that $400,000, well, we put it in the reserve. So that for future years, we can have a stabilization reserve, if you like, to make sure that we don't have these big fluctuations. So I put it in the reserve. I've just parked it there for future years in order to try and keep the bill somewhat stable, to not have any major surprises as much as possible. Now, the one-time expenses of $2.1 million. It's a mix of two things. There are the one-time requests from last year that we didn't spend and the new ones for this year. So we have $1.2 million. I'll show you the list in a little while. And there's $900,000 that was for the purchases that we didn't make last year. So there was 300, but we have $900,000 left over from last year that are carried forward. Now, on that, I'm going to go through this list. If you have any questions, and that's why all of these people are here today, right, to answer the questions. So now for administration, there's the stairs near the by City Hall, by the Acadie Street. And then here we mean the stairs near the fountain. They need repairs, and it'll cost about $50,000. We're talking about the warehouse as well. We have a warehouse for the archives in the market, and we're trying to bring it closer here to the library, but we have to renovate there. So that's about $50,000. Now, communication, we're going to migrate to a new platform for the intranet, so worth $15,000. Once again, communications, the welcome signs on the highways. We want to add some new ones, especially on Highway 2, I believe, at $110,000. The lights and the lighting of City Hall, the illumination, the outdoor lighting. We feel that that can be improved to have, it's just a nice, a little more bling bling there, worth about $100,000. And there's a year, we have a consultant for Francophonie. Last year was the first year that we had this amount in the budget, and it was for a 3-year period. So we're at the year 2 of 3 for an amount of $125,000. In immigration, there's an annual analysis on Francophone immigration for Dieppe of $21,000. And immigration, once again, the implementation of Dieppe immigration strategy, $5,000. And in finance, there is a consultant for asset management. The last time we prepared a report of this type was in 2021. So in 2026, that'll be 5 years later, and the province requires that we update our asset management reports to make sure we're eligible for different funding streams. Continue on down the list. Fire services. There's a new software, First Due, that will replace Crisis, worth $51,000. The replacement of the combat gear for wildfires, $46,000. Under Heritage, there's a Heritage Circuit project. We had put money aside for that last year. That wasn't used, but we're adding another $8,000 to it. And under Heritage, again, the acquisition installation of signage, outdoor recreational facilities. This is for a corporate visibility project that will generate sponsorships to have access to these signs at $45,000. Now, IT, and I say IT, but it's really, it encompasses different departments. There's a project that's called Jacardo Digital Twin Project. This is both for public works, engineering, environment departments. It's really a multi-department project. The consultation for the strategic IT plan development, $95,000. It was $102,000 for the previous one, and $95,000 for this one. Legal court cases. We have a court case that started this year that's going to continue through next year. We're adding $100,000. The environment, there's an ecological study. Last year we had put $50,000. We're adding another $50,000 this year. It was a 2-year project. So this will be year 2 of 2. And urban planning, the municipal development plan and zoning bylaw. We're at the last phase of that, and it's $200,000, which doesn't mean it's going to be completely finished in 2026, but it'll be the last time that we put this amount of money into it. If there's any money left over, it'll continue on into future years. And I'm going to stop right here to see if there are any questions, perhaps, on any of these one-time expenses. There was a question from Councillor de Boutier. Thank you, Your Worship. No, I got my answer. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, no questions. So let's continue on then. Now, the one-time requests for 2025, they weren't all completely used up. So at City Hall, the renovations, $90,000. Engineering, there was a traffic study for Champlain Street downtown, an amount of $100,000 that would put, but it wasn't done. So it's being added to this year's budget. For under IT, consultation for various projects. Last year we had an amount of $125,000, but we only used a little bit of it. So there's still 110,000 left over that we'd like to use this year. In the environment, ecological network study. And once again, I just mentioned it. There was 50,000 in year one of year. We only used 14,000 of it, so there's 36,000 are left over to use next year. The urban forest management plan, we had received $50,000 last year, and there's 15,000 left over. The sustainable development plan, it wasn't done last year, so there's a full amount of $60,000 is being requested for this year. The administration asks for a feasibility study at the Dieppe market. Originally, it was $180,000 that had been accepted, had been approved, but over the years, after 2 or 3 years, $80,000 was used, so there's still $100,000 left over. The Francophonie initiative, $100,000 was not used, and the recognition wall at the Uniplex, $50,000, same thing. It was asked for last year, but it wasn't used, so it's added to this year. Now, urban mobility infrastructure for new bus stops. And this is an amount of $22,000 that we used last year. We still have 15,000 this year. The Heritage Circuit, $10,000. I mentioned it earlier. A heritage book for the municipality's 75th anniversary, an amount of 50,000, I believe. And I think we used 40,000 of it, so there's 10,000 left over. The urban growth strategy and secondary plan, $80,000. There was $240,000 last year, but we used 160,000 of it, so there's still 80K left over. A strategy for hosting events here. This is an amount that we had in the reserve, and what we're asking for is events. We're going to get $80,000 from the reserve. We already had it, but we're hoping we can use it in 2026 in order to add to the 15th Franco Festival on August 15th. And Public Works needs analysis consultation at the Operations Center, $75,000 for a total of $931,000 for the one-time expenses in 2025.
Pour les nouvelles dépenses maintenant.
For new expenses now, they increased by $700,000. The first one is a request for an HR request, an amount of $400,000. Secondly, we have new requests in the order of $300,000. This public transit, we had a great presentation last week about this to explain what this $200,000 was needed for. I will add that the majority had been budgeted in 2025 for this year. We didn't spend that because buses came in late, so this is put over to 2026. With regard to the 3 software tools, the IT software tools, licenses that we have to renew every year, there's Remix, Jakarta, and First Due. $5,000 for car rental for the Information Technology Department. And lastly, $50,000 for an implementation of Park and Green Space Plan. Talking now about asset management, there's a 1.7 million. So I'm adding the debt service to this. It went for the financial plan. We established it back in 2018. 25% is put toward asset management. It means 3 things. So operating capital, the asset replacement program, and debt service. These 3 items for the total budget mean 25% of the operating budget to assets. So we've increased it by 500,000. The replacement equipment program of 1.2 million and debt service of 0.6 million. Had we had done the loan this year, if I come to see you about a loan, then the debt reimbursement would have increased. So the scenario would have been debt service, zero, asset replacement program would have been for $600,000. The total would have still come up to 1.1 million, but in different components. So because we were able to transfer the debt over for 1 year, the asset replacement program benefited this year because of that change. Lastly, let's talk about existing expenses 2026. What is costing us the most? The first item we talked about a moment ago, 700,000 for RCMP, the 1.5 million minus the 800,000 that I showed you in the first or second slides. 500,000 for existing salaries and including increases which have been granted for these salaries. 360,000 for electricity and heating. You know, it costs more to heat and light buildings. So we have 360 set aside for that. $100,000 for IT software like Microsoft 365. I think you've all been involved in this changeover, and Planivore. With regard to property assessment costs, there's 55,000 for that. Water costs, another 50,000 this year. I've been here for 17 or 18 years, and we've always increased by $50,000 per year. $60,000 for other, and $200,000 less for housing strategy. For this one, in the very last line, you can see that we had a reserve of $600,000. The housing strategy began in 2023. We put 250,000 down every year. However, there's a 50,000 that hadn't been used. That every year we accumulate about $200,000 per year, and we put it in the reserve. So we said, look, let's slow down this program somewhat. And since we have a reserve of $600,000, we'll bring it down to 50. So the operational budget went to 1.6 million. If it costs us for the housing strategy, we have enough of a reserve and we can readjust that in the future should that be necessary. But we said we were going to be putting a little too much aside for what had been used. So this money is set aside if once we need it. With regard to fund allocation, I'm concluding this presentation. You might want to slow down a little bit because Councillor Le Boutillier had a question. It's concerning the RCMP, the 700,000. Could you remind me if this increase is due to the presentation that they did for us? How did you come up with this 700,000 based on the presentation that they made to us last week? The 700,000, well, the presentation from last week, they were talking about a budget of $12.1 million. The budget we have here this evening has a cost of $11.6 million. So it does not include new human resources. 0.7 is the difference from the increase from last year. The budget from last year is about 11.9 million. And this year, the budget is 11.6 million. But this is the result, as I had explained earlier, that the true increase of the budget of 1.5 million, but I reduced it by $800,000 because of this surplus, which helped us pay the bills, if you will. That's the 700,000 that I'm giving you this evening. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. Here you have the fund allocation. With regard to salaries, 27.5 million, which is part of the total. an increase of 900,000. External commissions, 17.2 million, an increase of $600,000. I'm talking about Kodiak Transpo, CFR, and not the RCMP. Water, fire services, you have the 50,000 that went through. Sorry, I need a little sip of water here for my voice.
Donc, le coût de l'eau, lui, est rendu à 2.
So the water cost is $2.5 million. Operating capital and asset management, 15.7 million, so an increase of $1.7 million. Debt service, you have a reduction of $600,000, so 5.4 million. The ratio is at 6% almost. So that's about the lowest we've ever seen, but it's maintained artificially low because of what I explained, that a loan had been pushed forward for another year. Transfer to reserve, an increase of 1.1 million for a total of 1.5 million. Other operating expenses, 20.3 million, an increase of $600,000 for a total of $89.6 million. Lastly, we're going to take out the crystal ball to try and think about what's going to happen over the next 5 years. Compared to last year, the situation that we found ourselves in, we didn't know there was going to be a freeze of property assessments. At that point, last year, we knew that there was a gap between the estimated tax rate and that there were going to be increases in the future. So this is what I told you about last year. This year, I was a little more cautious, and I'm giving you the increases for the tax base growth that we need in order to maintain a neutral tax rate, that we don't change the tax rate. There are different ways of seeing this. For increases, this year, there was an increase of 4.9%. And I said, look, we're going to reduce it a little bit for the coming years, 4.5 to 4%. If, for example, the tax base was higher next year, then we could think about bringing down the tax rate the same way we did over the last 4 years. But for the time being, not knowing what's coming, I wanted to be cautious and say we're going to keep this at a 4.9, 4.5%. And what these amounts truly represent, and I forgot to mention this at the outset, is that when we learned that we increased by 5.5%, it's for new construction, which is at 5.5%, or maybe 5.4%. It's the majority of the increase at 5.5%. Or the small balance left over in new construction is when a house is sold in Dieppe, and then when that happens, there's a reset which happens. So if the house has a property tax rate of $400,000 and sells for $525,000, well, the assessment for New Brunswick reassesses this house at the price of $525,000. It doesn't go back to where it was at the outset. So someone who buys a house and property assumes that difference. So it's included in that 5.5% that I mentioned earlier. With regard to capital budget, you can see that it's floating around 40 million. Borrowing in the coming years is around 8 million, and then we'll go up to 14 million. The big difference here is for Dieppe Boulevard. Dieppe Boulevard is a huge construction project. We need a lot of subsidies for that. In 2028, it'll be done, and then we won't have much funding after that, or anticipate much funding. The debt ratio should increase from 6 to 9.1% because of this building or construction. So this represents, Your Worship, Budget 2026. I'm here if there are any questions. Thank you. very much for having given us an overview which allows us to try and understand. Questions by council members. Councillor Goodboo. Thank you, Your Worship. I have some questions about various topics. I wanted to come back to the policing authority. I recognize that there are increases in revenue of $4.5 million, and that with regard to the policing services, we have to absorb 1.5 million, about a third of the budget when you look at it on a yearly basis. And if I've correctly understood, these amounts includes the new building, because we have this new building which is going to be opening soon, the hiring of 17 new members, which we approved last year. They've been hired over the course of 2025. We didn't absorb those costs because by September, they had only hired 7 of the 17, but next year we'll be absorbing the total cost of these 17 new members. So along with that, we had a request by the policing authority in their new budget for an additional amount of 15 new members, even if we haven't yet hired all the 17 that were approved. But we haven't been given the data to validate this request. If I've correctly understood in the budget that we have, we're not adding these new 15 members to support them. Because of the wish of the council, I did not include those figures. The policing authority, this is the approach that we require this information. My second question is that the soft densification, we have an amount of $7 million, which is non-reimbursable from the federal government. I just want to know what would be the impact, if ever, the conditions of this contribution were satisfied, what would be the impact on the debt rate? Last week or the week before, you indicated that we didn't have those amounts, that we would have to borrow. What would this mean for the figures that you provided? What would be the impact on the level of debt that we would have in 26 if a soft densification is not attained and we have to reimburse that money? So last week, we presented the capital budget. I don't have the figures in front of me right now, but from what I remember, we have 2.1 million approximately that we took from financing for the FACL for this housing project. So there are decisions to be made if ever we don't get that funding. We either cancel the project or we could borrow more money, which is the scenario that you might determine today. So if we were to borrow, we're talking about 2 million. 2 million over the next 15 years is a reimbursement of $200,000 per year. So the impact on the debt ratio would be a little higher than what is being shown to you today. When the time comes, if you have a time to look this a little more closely, it would be interesting to have various scenarios. I think it would be relevant when we start thinking about this. I had a third question, if that's okay, Your Worship. Yes, go ahead. With regard to building permits, I have understood that in 2025, we're looking at $1.4 million worth of these building permits. And what's in the budget for next year? 800,000. So it went down. If you look at the trend over the last 4 years, when was the last time we had 11 or $800,000 worth of construction? I would say 4 or 5 years ago. And why are you saying it'll be reduced? That is a general trend, a lack of construction? Well, the appetite isn't as high as it was, so we want to make sure that we don't have any missing funding for the coming year. Listen, I'm very conservative in my personal budget. I understand this approach. And so it's a very conservative approach for this year. And I'm pleased to see that you have the reason for being conservative. But I have seen that it seems a little redundant the way you're being cautious. We also aligned it with the housing strategy of $200,000. We said that because we're losing that 200,000, we reduce the income by 200,000, so it has a neutral effect on the budget. I wanted to confirm the amount in the budget available for property purchases, the projects that we wanted to start. So is it understood that we have no increase or reduction? We maintain the budget as in the past for any property purchase or land purchase? It should have been a question last week when I was talking about this, but not a big change generally speaking. A couple of quick things with regard to the RCMP. I share your frustration with the surplus, which happened. I would say that it is being addressed directly with the policing authority. We wanted to have some progress made there this year, but it's a goal for next year. So please be patient for a while longer. I know it was difficult for you, so thank you for your patience there, because there's a surplus there, and it makes it very difficult when you prepare your budgets, and also difficult for us on council, especially since they went from a deficit of 2 million to a surplus of 2 million. So it's a big impact. It's very difficult. I agree with you. It's not going to get to maintain. I think council has sent a letter and a resolution asking them to resolve this very soon. Last question, you mentioned the asset management. When we reviewed the policy, it was in 2021, one of the first years, my first year around this table, in fact, we talked about the possibility of including natural asset management too. You asked for an amount here to explore this. Are we going to be looking at the possibility of managing natural assets, or are we going to do this in a separate way? The amount I mentioned to you is really for the assets. We have the true assets, if you will, but with regard to natural assets, I have Mr. Alexandre with me, who has undertaken some steps to do a webinar to explain what natural assets are for a municipality. This is something that we are going to be undertaking very soon. It will be interesting to see how we integrate this into our policies. That's it for my questions. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. To correct one thing, when we talk about when we're talking about saving money, that we don't try to use the word conservative. Let's try not to use that word. We're cautious. We're not conservative. Yes, I can see this point. What I was talking about was caution and prudence as a definition. Until others decide to get into this discussion, I'm so apolitical that never even occurred to me when I used the word. Okay, are there any further questions? Even if I turn off your lights? I have one more about water and sewage, but that's coming now.
Donc, maintenant, nous voilà. Oui, nous voilà.
Let's move on now to the presentation on the 2026 water sewer operating budget presentation. There are fewer slides to show you, so it'll go a little quicker. What we're proposing for 2026 is that the rates stay essentially the same. We had a rate of 948 last year. For 2026, we propose the same rate of 948 this year. And for 2026, we're proposing, as I said, the same rate. So there are no changes for water of $500, sewer $238, and Transaqua at $210 per unit for Transaqua. The budget last year was of $16.54 million this year. Water revenue, 7.19 million. Sewer revenue, 6.44. The general operating fund, we have added 50,000 per year. So there's a transfer from the general fund for sewer, water and sewer. So that amount is $2.05 million. And other revenues are $860,000. There's a transfer from reserve and investment revenue. Regarding budget, the expense analysis is a budget that went from 16 million to 16.5 million. I've taken out the transfers to reserve and the one-time items for 2025 for a base budget of $15.21 million. Then we add these other 4 items, the one-time items, N3 2026, 14 million, new items, 0.20 or $200,000, transferred to reserve, 680,000, existing expenses, $310,000. I'll be giving you the details of these figures. First of all, with regard to one-time items, 2026, new items, the one-shot deals, there's an amount of $137,000. The first one is the amount of $62,000, which is a commissioning study for a water source well. Last year, this amount had been requested of an amount of $80,000. 18 was spent, so we have an amount of $62,000 left over. IT consulting for the project. Last year, we had an amount of $25,000. We add another $20,000 this year for a total of $45,000. 30,000, 2026 one time. It's a monitoring well level recorder. That's the request for this year. For new items, for N2, new money, if you will, here I've put the emphasis on asset management. I would say that the value of our assets, water assets and sewer assets, the piping is fairly high. The budgets are lower than normal. So I'm trying to put a little more aside, if you will, for these asset management items. With the piping has to be there for many years to come. And these are huge amounts of money. And I wanted to increase our asset management for water and sewers. So 100,000 for water asset, 100,000 for sewer. Transfer to reserve, 680,000. There's a surplus of 250,000 in 2024 and an anticipated surplus of 430 for 2026. For 2026, we have higher income than expenses. And so we're taking the value of $430,000 and we're putting it in a reserve fund. We can say, and you'll see further on the presentation, one of the things that's going to increase in the coming years is the cost of water from the city of Moncton. Next year, in 2026, there is a project worth $10 million to address the issue of blue-green algae. And the way we establish the calculation of how much we pay for the water, it takes 3 to 4 years to define that. In 2026, we'll have the true figures only at the end of 2027 for the budget of 2028. It's only then that from 2028 on, we'll see a big increase in the cost of water. Right now, it costs us 58 cents per cubic meter, and it could increase to 78 cents, 80 cents per cubic meter. So these increases are going to be happening. That's why here you can see that, sure, there's an anticipated surplus in 2026, but it's going to be disappearing over the coming years. We're going to need that money in order to make sure that the increase for Dieppe residents is done progressively and doesn't come too quickly for them. But you will see, and you'll see this, it'll be in my last slide in a moment. With regard to existing expenses, they've increased by $313,000. There are salary increases of $95,000. There's water purchase. Even if the cost of water went from 59 cents to 58 cents this year, we bought a lot more. We went from 3.55 cubic meters to 3.85 cubic meters. So much more water was purchased this year. If you remember, I was saying that in 2012, we were buying 3.1 cubic meters and they were still at 3.1 million cubic meters, but the population has increased. But now we're catching up. There have been huge increases and the city is growing at a rapid rate with an increase in water consumption. But revenue is there, and we have many more units. We're selling much more of it when all is said and done. There's another $50,000 for operating capital and asset management programs. With regard to Trans Aqua, there's $86,000, 410 units at $210 a unit. The operating expenses of $120,000 and the debt service at $280,000. Once again, this debt is disappearing. There is no new debt on the way. With regard to fund allocation, to come to the $16.54 million, salaries represent $4.33 million, water purchases from City of Moncton $2.22 million, wastewater treatment with Transaqua $2.95 million, operating capital set at $2.09 million, an increase of $350,000, debt service, which has reduced somewhat, $1.94 million, water operations cost us $1.64 million, and sewer operations are about $700,000. The transfer to the reserve is about $680,000, giving a total of $16.54 million. With regard to projections over the coming 5 years, you can see that the residential unit rates are going to increase by $8 to $16 per year. This represents an increase of 1.5, 1.6%, which is not a huge increase, but I must say that the 948, we're at the 5th or 6th year without any change. So we're sure that it's going to change in the future. However, depending on the units that I budgeted for, if it's higher, maybe we won't have to increase the unit rates in future years. So if increases that are lower than what I think, so truly, this is the main component of these two items. For operating budget, this should increase from $16.5 to $19.5 million in the coming 5 years. For capital projects, we're around $13-14 million, except $8.2 million in 2029. Borrowing in millions are under $4 million, and the debt ratio is between 11.8 to 13.6%. For this budget, we can get to 50%. So we're very much below where we can go. We're far from the maximum in the debt ratio. Your Worship, that's it for my presentation this evening. Thank you. Any questions about the last list of water and sewage budget? There being none, thank you very much for this presentation. I don't see any other lights on for questions. As always, things are clear, concise. So we agree. Thank you.
Pas de questions de personne.
So if there are no questions, our vast public here this evening, please identify yourself. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Paul Béliveau, resident of Dieppe. Good evening, Your Worship. Good evening, Mr. Béliveau, councillors, staff. First of all, congratulations to the municipality for the award you received, and to you, Your Worship, for your 25 long years, but good years. Well, perhaps long for other people. No, well, okay. But thank you for your service, and congratulations for everything that you've been able to achieve over the years. Now, what I didn't know before was going to be mentioned this evening, and it's on the. And I'd like to mention something that I'm working on with Councillor Lantin to find out if there's a part of the trail between Central Street and Bourg Road, if it'll ever be rebuilt like it was before that construction project that is there now, because I haven't seen anything. And unless if somebody can bring me there and show me where the trail is, I don't see them there. I don't see anything. So I'm making the request once again to the municipality that if you let me know if I can show you if you want to go there, but so far there has been nothing differently since since there was a clear cutting in the whole area. Nothing has been replaced, and it's not only just bushes. There were certain trees of a certain size, and the trunks are still the tree trunks are still there. They've remained, but I'm just wondering if that has been addressed because I haven't seen any difference um, since all of that was cut. Would somebody from engineering be able to answer the question? Are you talking about the trail between Bourg Street and Bourg Road and Central Street? Yeah, yeah. There's about it's 200 meters from Central Street towards Bourg Road, behind the new development. Thank you for the question. I can try and answer. We've worked with the Alliance, the Watershed Alliance, to plant some small arbs because it's not efficient to plant mature trees. Of course, the trees wouldn't grow, but we'll go put signs up and we'll see and we'll identify the trees that were planted with the Watershed Alliance. But we'll look at that specific section if you'd like and see what we can do to add more trees. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for coming here. I don't see anybody else in the room. Nobody else wants to take the floor? No? So let's continue on then. There's nobody on the phone either? No. No emails either? No. Let's move on then to the adoption of minutes. Yes, the adoption of minutes. Yes, the minutes of the last regular council meeting. Would anybody like to move it? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Turgeon-Roy on the question. There are none. All those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. And the minutes of the last regular council meeting are adopted as presented. We now move on to item 11, motions, memorandums, and nominations. From administration, Mr. Melançon. Yes. Our first item this evening, you know that at the end of the year, the city has to put money into the reserve, and these meeting is scheduled for December 8th, but that's a little early in the month to be able to calculate the exact amounts that we have to put in the reserve. So following discussions with you and with the finance department, we suggest that the meeting scheduled for December 8th be postponed to December 15th so that we have more accurate figures for your approval for the transfers to the reserve. So if everybody agrees, we will post it publicly that this meeting has been changed, and we will hold it on December 15th. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. That the regular council meeting scheduled for December 8th, 2025 be postponed to December 15th, 2025 at 7 p.m. and I so move it. Thank you. Would somebody like to second? Councillor Rideau on the question. All those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. It's carried as presented. 11.1.2, the adoption of policy A-8. And who would like to read the resolution? Oh, well, here, Your Worship, you have an amendment suggested here to policy A-8. In the past, occasionally we had municipalities that would that wanted to acquire vehicles that we no longer needed, that didn't meet our needs. And sometimes for smaller communities, it might be better suited to their needs. So in the past, we had to sell it by auction. So we're suggesting an amendment here that would allow it to offer it to the municipalities here, especially in the Regional Services Commission 7, region 7 here, our entity. So that would allow us to get a value for it. And if we put it on the market, and it's perhaps a community would like to have this vehicle. So if the council is comfortable in wanting to help our neighbors, then we would proceed with this change. Otherwise, we will continue with the auction. Thank you. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. That Council repeal policy A-8 entitled Sale of Vehicles or Equipment and adopt policy A-8 2025 entitled Sale of Vehicles or Equipment. And I so move it. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Brideau. On the question. Oh, there's a question here. Councillor Godbout. Thank you. I'm in favor of the resolution, but I just wanted to clarify, is the policy that establishes limits, would it explain the role of the CAO in the exercise of the discretion that is in this bylaw? No, the answer is no, because we tried to allow an amount of $250,000. So if if this decision had an impact of more than $250,000, through selling, let's say, a fire truck, it would seem to me that this policy, the delegation policy, should be a part of that policy. It shouldn't be seen as express permission to be an exception to that policy. This policy always has to take into consideration the maximum amount of the CAO. Yes, so it would always, yes, that would be in effect, of course. Okay, it's just a qualification. A detail. Thank you. Yes, I have a question, Your Worship, a question of information. In the section that is 1.2, it says equipment, parts, that it has to include the approximate market value of the vehicle or the part or the piece of equipment. How do you identify an approximate market value? Well, this is a question that the department asked for us, because it's not always obvious with the wear and tear and the use, the year. So we ask our staff to try and determine that. And we might also go to a third party to determine the value, somebody whose expertise is recognized in the field. So we do have that option to go see a third party to identify the value. But we have mechanics here who are certified, and they can give us their opinion. And if we're comfortable with that, we can either go with the amount they suggest, or we can go see an expert in the field. Okay, from what I understand, if there is a request from another municipality, we'll go directly to them. Yes. My question is this, and I don't understand all of the ins and outs, but why wouldn't we do both? Why don't we issue a call out and also then go with a request of the municipalities to try and get the best offer? Well, if the amount that we identify will be the amount that we are looking for. So if a municipality can help us out, that's the idea of being a good neighbor. Now, if we go out on the market at the same time, we might consider that. I'm just wondering why not. Well, the idea is to try and help our neighboring communities who might have a need for that type of equipment that might meet their operational needs. That's the principle behind it. Thank you. Councillor Brideau, you have a question? No? Okay. There are no further questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. Councillor Godbout. Yes, just a follow-up of Councillor Leboutilliers' Councillor, what is the administrative work necessary to prepare something like this, to go out to an offer, to offer it? I mean, I understand what you're saying. If you have to draft it, in any case, you might as well offer it to the municipality, but also put it out to tender, but I'm just wondering if we're setting timelines that aren't necessary. We might do both at the same time. Maybe if the administrative work has to be is the same to if we put it out to tender or if we offer it to our neighboring municipality. No, well, the time necessary to prepare a piece of equipment for auction. Well, I like the idea of helping our neighboring communities, and I think that Councillor Leboutilliers' point is interesting. Why not do both at the same time? Well, for an auction, we use the province. The province has an agreement with Jardine Auctioneers that allows us to use that company for auctions. When we sell a vehicle to an auction, it's a process that is established. It goes to them. They evaluate it. They set a minimum price, and usually we get a little more than the opening price of the auction. Historically, that's what we see. But in this case, it's a little more specific. Our mechanics are not certified to evaluate, to appraise a vehicle, but they can bring it to an appraiser. So if we think a municipality might be interested, well, it's to make it available, to inform them, to tell them, give them a few days or a week. If nobody's interested, well, then we go to the auction. But once it goes to the auction, we lose all control over it. So for us, the auction is still a very useful tool. I mean, if there's a request on the table that would allow the municipality to come to an agreement directly with another municipality, that that would be great. But most of the time, I think we'll still go to auction as exactly like we do now. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you. If there are no further questions, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. It's carried as presented. We're now at, where are we? 11.2, no, 11.1.3. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, 11.1.3, the merger of the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick and the Cities Association. Yes, we were members of 3 different associations. So now we're still members of the AFMNB, which is the Association of Francophone Municipalities of New Brunswick, but there was an Association of Cities of New Brunswick that included 8 cities, and there was also the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick. Now, for the last 2 years, just a little more, there was a question of regrouping these 2 associations, so that took place. It was executed, all of the municipalities agreed, and it's almost completed. So we're members now with of the Union of Municipalities, but with an urban municipality section. So we're in the same association, and this resolution, all of the municipalities that were members of the Association of Cities have to adopt this resolution to make sure that the last step is taken care of, to make sure that we wind up the Association of the Cities and we execute the decisions and transfer all of the information to the Union of Municipalities. All of this to say that the Association of Cities no longer exists. Everything is transferred to the UMNB, and this winds up the Association of Cities. So we're still just in two associations. I think we still need a resolution. Yes. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Lantaigne. So we're reading a resolution that's already been adopted. Well, we have to do this to make it legal. It's the last step to wind down the association. The undersigned, being all of the members of the Cities of New Brunswick Association, Inc., Association des Cités du Nouveau-Brunswick, the company, entitled to vote and pass the written resolutions herein after set forth as if the same had been submitted at a meeting of the members of the company duly called and held for the purpose of acting on such resolutions, do hereby resolve in lieu of a meeting of the members of the company as follows. Be it resolved that the conveyance, whoops, I'm having trouble here tonight. The conveyance, transfer, and assignment of all of the company's remaining assets and liabilities to the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick, Inc., Union des Municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick, Inc., in accordance with the terms and conditions of the indenture of conveyance, transfer, and assignment dated October 27th, is hereby approved. Bylaw number 2025-1 of the company, as enacted by the directors on October 27th, 2025, is hereby ratified and confirmed as a bylaw of the company. That wouldn't be the 25th. It's the date that the members voted in favor, and we don't have the date. They didn't share that information with us. We'll add it later. Okay. So is hereby ratified and confirmed as a bylaw of the company. The resolutions adopted by the directors of the company are hereby approved, and all prior acts of the directors are hereby approved. Each of the members of the company hereby waive their right to receive a copy of this resolution at least 15 days in advance of signing it as per the bylaws of the company. And this resolution may be signed and transmitted in counterparts bearing original, facsimile, or other electronic signatures, including e-signatures, and each such counterpart, when taken together, shall constitute one fully executed resolution, and notwithstanding the date of execution shall be deemed to bear the effective date set forth below. Enacted by all of the members of the company pursuant to section 103.1.1 of the Companies Act, RSNB 1973, chapter C-13, as of the date first written above, and I so move it.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Lantaigne, seconded by Councillor Brideau on the question. Especially not. All those in favor will say aye. Against, nay. The resolution is carried as presented. I think we've been trying to get this done for the past 3 years. It moves from one lawyer's office to another. So I think we're at the end of this adventure. Now 11.2 community development. We have another big visitor again this year, the Santa Claus Parade. Councillor Godette can tell you about it, but we're talking about a temporary street closure before Place Champlain to Acadie Street. We do this every year, and young people seem to be happy on the evening of November 22nd. I think there's a rain date. This happened to us for the first time last year. So the resolution for a street closure. Councillor Godette might have something else to add. No, thank you. I'll read the resolution. The council authorized the temporary closure of the following streets for the Greater Moncton Santa Claus Parade on Saturday, November 22nd, 2025, in case of inclement weather, the parade will be postponed to November 23rd, 2025. The following day, Champlain Street from the western city limit to Acadie Avenue from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Paul Street from Champlain Street to Olivier Street from 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. and Virginia Avenue from Champlain Street to Beauséjour Street from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. I so move. Moved by Councillor Godet, seconded by Councillor Genet. On the question, there being none, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Against, nay. The resolution is carried as presented. Under municipal bylaws, no bylaws this evening, Your Worship. Let's go quickly. Notices of motion, no notices of motion either. This brings us now to item 14, inquiries and announcements by members of council. Let's return to my left here. Councillor Godet. Thank you, Your Worship. I have nothing to add. Just go Blue Jays, go. And good evening to all of you. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Le Boutillier. Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing for me either this evening. Thank you. Councillor Genet. Thank you. Nothing for this evening. Councillor Brideau. Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Godet has just mentioned the Christmas parade. I want to talk to you about Halloween, which is happening this Friday. People love to decorate in macabre ways but the message I want to share with you this evening is that there are also decorations or items which are very strong. There are posters that might hurt your neighbor or others, especially when you talk about the dead and corpses. So I simply want to underline that we still have to be careful on occasions like this, not to go too far. Think also about respecting your neighbor or people in the community. So the type of message I want to share with you this evening is to be respectful in the decorations that you put up and to think that perhaps there are people who might seriously be harmed with some of the decorations and signage. You know, if you look at the doors over the course of the year, there are some buildings that have graffiti on them, and how it can be disappointing or hurtful to see businesses that have all these drawings on them. In the same way, with Halloween, it's a lovely evening. You want to celebrate with children. It's specifically for children. But once again, there's a whole issue of respect toward our neighbors for things that are written which might be hurtful to others. That's my message this evening, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Let's move on with Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing for me this evening. Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. I simply wanted to mention that 2 weeks ago, Jean-Marc had announced the 65th anniversary of the library. So I participated in the event, and I was truly impressed by participation of the public and our residents. I also want to say that Mr. Paul, who was here earlier, but to thank people who are on the board, the organizers or the people who work at the library. I see a former employee of the library here. So it was really, really good. And I was happy to participate in that. I want to add that. And another note, I was there at the reopening of the Walmart last week. what a dynamic atmosphere it was. It's a lovely store. I want to underline the fact that this business has invested more than $25 million in their brand new store. It's in our community and it employs people from our community. And so I wanted to congratulate them on their reopening and they continue to invest in our community. Another thing I want to mention, we have the students from the info communications program who came today and there was a learning activity for them, but I also want to underline that it often happens that students from the college come or from the University of Moncton, they look at us, they watch us, and I greet Ms. Bertil Gagnier's students. She's a language teacher at the CCNB. They watch us almost every week. I did not know this, but in order to have learning activities and assessment of information documents, so I greet them and wish them well as they watch us work every week. I simply wanted to say hello to them. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Councillor Brideau. It's a definite no, but your light came on all of a sudden, quite by accident. Okay, let's move on. Councillor Goodboo. Thank you, Your Worship. We had busy weeks with the policing authority. Last week with the governance committee, a special meeting is on this Thursday, a closed door meeting, which is happening, and I'll keep you up to date on that. Thank you. Councillor Lantagne. Thank you, Worship. Nothing from me except I want to add for Halloween and correct me, unless I'm wrong, that the latest time you can go see other, to go trick-or-treating is after 8 o'clock. After 8 o'clock, you can lock your doors and take off your mask. Not the mask I have on this evening, but I'll take off my Halloween mask. Thank you. And good evening to all of you. Thank you for your patience. I know it was a long evening for all of you who've already put in a full day's work. So I thank you very much for being here this evening.